Hello, everybody, and welcome to this final panel. I hope you can. I think it's working. So this panel has the intriguing title: "Modalities of Science Advice: Operationalising in Context." And so, what I suggested at the beginning of the meeting to the panel was that they think about just different ways in which they give advice in some repeating pattern of the way in which advice is required. Now, we all knew, however, that the meeting was going to happen before they gave their talks, and that this would probably change the detail, or if not the entire point of what they wanted to say. And I haven't caught up with them, so I have no idea just what they're going to say at this point. But if we can be a little bit systemic in our thinking, that would be good. Let's say that. They've each got 1 or 2 slides max. They're each meant to talk for 6 minutes. Please start shifting noisily in your seats if they go on. And I'm gonna sit down here and try and wave if it really does go on. However, this is a great panel. We have Heather Douglas, who's Chair in Science and Society of the Balsillie School of International, sorry if I got that wrong, that's what it says here, International Affairs, University of Waterloo in Canada. And this is the order in which they're going to speak. Mark Ferguson, who's the Chief Scientific Advisor to Government and the Director General of the Science Foundation of Ireland. Remy Quirion, who's the Chief Scientist of the Province of Quebec. Tatio Arimoto, who's the Director of Innovation, Science and Technology Program of the Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, Tokyo, and an executive member of the Global Science Forum. We have Fidel Castro Diaz-Balart, who's a science advisor to the President of the State Council and Vice President of the Academy of Sciences in Cuba. And we have Brian Collins, who's Professor, Department of Science, Technology, Engineering and Public Policy, and a Director of the International Centre for Infrastructure Futures in the UK, University College London. And then we've got some guy who seems to hang around a lot at this meeting, who is also going to say, reflect systemically on the way he gives science advice. So without further ado, we're going to unleash these people, and then we will definitely have time for discussion. So, Heather, over to you.
So there it is, the one slide. So first I want to thank Sir Peter and his fantastic staff for making this happen. I'm a philosopher, so I don't actually give people advice. It's generally a bad idea. But it's been thrilling for me to be here as someone who's studied the science policy interface for, almost 20 years now, to be able to hear and learn from so many of you. And what I'm going to try to do is give a bit of a conceptual structure for thinking about what we might take away from this fascinating and exciting meeting. Because in our discussions about science advice, there have been lots of things that we want to improve. It's one of the reasons why we came together to have this meeting, is because we felt like there was a need to do science advice better. And so what I've done here is try to organize the various ways in which we might improve science advice into 3 different levels of intervention. The first level is to address broad cultural tendencies. So we've heard people wanting to improve the understanding of science by citizens and to improve scientific literacy, or perhaps even more importantly, the conception of scientific literacy that informs science education. We heard people talk about the need to improve science journalism and the way in which the media portrays science. So it's not just science cheerleading or just a superficial balance of objectivity by finding the one opposing expert out there, but something much richer that engages with science in a more forthright and perhaps a more complex way. Or to improve the science training among scientists, junior scientists, regarding their societal responsibilities. So we could think about those sort of broad scale. Let's try to change the culture in which we're operating so it can be more amenable to science advice. The second level is to address the structure of institutions, and there's been a great deal of discussion about what kinds of institutions are effective for science advice. We've heard people argue very cogently for separating science advising from science lobbying functions, diversifying science advising structures, that we must have both internal and external science advising systems in a robust society, ways of generating public engagement processes for formal science advice, or creating clear guidelines for public service scientists so they can communicate their results to the public more directly. So that's one thing we could do. Another thing we could do is sort of work on institutions and policies around those institutions. But there's a third level of change that I, as a philosopher, of course, naturally think about, and that's to improve our way of thinking about science and society. We should, for example, replace the linear model with an ecosystem model. The ecosystem metaphor keeps coming up here, and I think jettisoning the linear model wholesale, because it's almost never accurate, and talking about the interrelationships of the parts of the science system and the way it fits into society would be a far more productive way of talking. We need to acknowledge the legitimate roles for social and ethical values in science. I, this morning, posted a blog entry on The Guardian's Political Science on values in science advice. So I'm not going to go through that entry here, but there are legitimate roles for social and ethical values in science, and acknowledging those could really improve what we're doing. We need to think about supporting the autonomous decision-making of both elected officials and the public in democratic societies. This is the requirement of democracies. And so when we talk about using, say, behavioral sciences, we want to make sure we're doing that to support autonomous decision-making rather than to try to get people to do what we think they should do. And we also should perhaps, I think, embrace uncertainty in science. Uncertainty has been an ongoing theme, but it seems to be something that people are more sort of frustrated that it's around because it makes science advice messy. And in a completely different blog post, which is now up at the conference website, I argued that we should actually embrace uncertainty in science as a keystone of science's robustness. Now, so those are the three levels. They're clearly going to be interdependent in practice, and I suspect there are synergies to be found among them. But there are some levels that are easier places to start than others. And I think, surprisingly, for some, the last one is the easiest place to start. That we can, and I think are, in this very meeting, improving our way of thinking about science and society and science advising in this room over the past 2 days. Doing this will help make clearer whether and which changes in institutional structures we might need in a particular national or international context. We're not going to be able to make the job of science advisor an easy one with such changes. We know that's a naive and probably not very interesting goal, but we can help ensure that it's not an impossible job doomed to failure with these kinds of changes. So seeing that there are at least 3 distinct levels for addressing the problems of science advice will hopefully make clear where our efforts can best be placed and how to find the synergies and the will to pursue those. At the very least, it's clear that there is much work to be done. How's that? Is that short? Excellent. Okay, next one.